Hello class, today my brief presentation will go over the topic on how to ensure the viability of a major global system, and the global system I chose to do is the International Monetary Fund. And I wanted to choose a global system that obviously had an overall dominance from the US, and this is evident in how the IMF voting share works. So its voting share is tied to members' financial commitments to the IMF, and the US is actually the largest contributor at $155 billion, and that gives them a 16% voting share, and that is the single largest voting bloc in the IMF. So that then gives them a lot of power over the organization and power to influence what their main interests are. And so the background of the IMF was created because of the result of the financial system collapsing internationally because of the Great Depression and the Second World War. And so in the 1940s, there was a conference held at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, and there the IMF was created to promote open markets and to end economic nationalism. So the IMF is really seen as a global financial regulator that includes activities like surveillance, lending, and technical assistance. For this slide, I wanted to talk about what the concern was, and I wanted to focus that on the IMF's competition, mainly the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, because it's naturally a competitor to the US because it's originated from China, and they both have similar foundational purposes. And like besides economic purposes, there's an underlying political vision behind all of these programs. And through the liberal lens, we can see that this is more of a means of a country aiming for economic interdependency that will generate more relationships that then lead to partnerships and alliances. And then, so the BRI is basically an investment in infrastructure to basically connect China and the rest of the world, and they are mainly targeting developing countries, but very strategically planned and purposely done. They are going to these countries and pointing out that they lack certain essential infrastructures like roads or bridges or whatever it may be, and telling them basically that they can lend them the money to build them and also their companies to do it for them as well. And this results in countries basically becoming economically dependent on China. And I think that's what makes more of a political impact. And from a very critical US perspective, it's evident that this is very strategic and political because it gives China access to certain markets and easier trade routes. And a very important perspective is that once China goes to these critical regions and creating a relationship with them that can turn into political influence, and that can translate into votes supporting China on its view on Taiwan or whatever it may be. And from a very realist point of view, we can see that China is building a road for themselves and then charging that country for that road, the bill for doing it. Another thing I wanted to point out was that countries don't necessarily want to come to the IMF, even as a last resort lending program, because there's so much stigma, negative stigma that is attached to borrowing from them that labels their country insolvent, or that they already know that once coming to the IMF, there's going to be some really harsh conditions that they have to agree to that can take away their sovereignty over their own country. And based on the articles that I've read, that isn't the case for the BRI. Most of them say that states are willingly coming to the BRI because of its reputation of being a win-win deal for both sides, for the main reason that there isn't any additional conditions that they have to give up or agree to. And the example I put is from Greece, and the fact that Greece is normally known to want to work with Western institutions, but since these deals and programs have been working for them with the BRI, it's creating a more deeper tie that is creating jobs for the local Greeks and even turning into more investments. And this is a problem for the IMF because states who want to work with them or normally work with them have this other option to go to now. And another problem that could be a possible national security threat is that at these ports that the BRI are going to and building at are future ways the Chinese can advance their security concern. And the article points out that at these ports, they are connected to Chinese laws. So the first one would be that at the ports that are being built overseas or at home must be built to the standard designs of the PLA, which is the Chinese military, that will eventually accommodate their Navy ships. And the other alarming law would be that all Chinese, including its military, its companies, and everyone that is involved in any project from the Chinese, are legally required to support the PLA, not just in war, but in peace times as well. And also what another source pointed out is that at these ports, they are obviously intended to support supply chain and like import and export for trades, and therefore they will naturally want to protect these ports with coast guards and whatnot. So even though these invested infrastructures are not militarized now, they do have the potential to become militarized later, which follows a Chinese doctrine that they have called the civilian first, military later doctrine, and that basically just allows them to spread their influence on where they are building. And like I pointed out, that this is a very similar way that the U.S. will spread its influence to the rest of the world through the Monroe Doctrine, or like manifest destiny.